Greetings, I'm Enraged Eggplant and welcome to Dungeons and GURPS. In this video, I will tell you how I would make D&D-style scrolls in GURPS. In most aspects, I have the same issues with scrolls that I have with potions in D&D. In short, GURPS magic scrolls are fine, sorcerer scrolls are ridiculously expensive, but otherwise you'd have no system of crafting scrolls. So I decided to solve it the same way, by using Metatronic generators. I also tried to include as many scroll-specific rules from GURPS Thaumatology and GURPS Dungeon Fantasy IV Sages. First, let me list the properties of scrolls. A scroll can hold multiple spells, but can cast only one at once. A scroll can only be used once, its power and writing dissipates after use. Only a mage can use a scroll, with exceptions that I will talk about later. A scroll must be held in two hands to be used. A scroll must be read with a strong voice. A scroll can be read silently without triggering its effects. A scroll can be written in any language. I didn't like that in D&D all scrolls were implied to be written in Draconic. Why couldn't you write a scroll in Common or Elven? Pronunciation is important. If the mage reading the scroll has accented spoken comprehension of the scroll's language, a scroll casts its spell at a -1 penalty. If he has broken spoken comprehension, the scroll casts it at -3. If he has none, he cannot articulate the words properly and cannot cast the spell. A spell that requires no die roll loses 10% of its effectiveness, bonus to reactions or skill, DR, etc. per -1. Just like the normal abilities do. To use a scroll, the reader requires accented or better comprehension of the written language it was penned in. Spells may be written on any material. Reading a scroll requires twice the normal casting time for the spell. The mage reading the scroll pays the normal energy cost. If a casting roll is required, roll using the skill level of the mage who wrote the scroll. If you find the scroll in the treasure pile or want to determine the skill level randomly for another reason, you can roll 1d plus 9. If the spell's effects are variable, the scroll will specify such details as area, damage dice, and level of effect. The user cannot adjust these things. And a mage can learn spells from scrolls. To build a scroll as a Metatronic generator, we will have to create a meta enhancement first. According to page 47 of GURPS Low-Tech, a typical scroll is 12 inches wide and 200 inches long, and has room for about 5,000 words. A partially unrolled scroll, I believe, would have SM-4, that's a small item. GURPS Dungeon Fantasy IV Sages says that a scroll weighs 0.05 pounds, that's closer to a tiny item. Considering this, in my opinion, it would be better to represent a scroll as a mini item in terms of cost, but keep these parameters the same. Each scroll must have a point cost that will help us calculate the price. Pyramid 346 provides several meta enhancements that represent different item types, but none of them fit the scrolls. We will have to create new ones. In any case, remove variable, requires gestures, requires material component, and similar enhancements and limitations that are not appropriate for scrolls. I have come up with the following meta enhancement, but it is possible to make different variations. There may be other scroll forms with their own meta enhancements, but let's make an example scroll. In short, crafting and pricing works identically to the Metatronic alchemy. Thus, at TL3 the cost equals to point cost times $30. Although typically scrolls are written by wizards and sorcerers, scrolls made by spellcasters of other types and traditions may exist. Scrolls only work for casters of the correct type. The reader needs Arcane Sorcerer's Empowerment for an Arcane scroll, Divine Sorcerer's Empowerment for a Divine one, Nature Sorcerer's Empowerment for a Druidic scroll, etc. In addition, magical writing must be understood for the scroll to be used properly. Arcane scrolls are identified with Thaumatology. Some of these scroll types may work a bit differently, and that will be represented with cost factor, not additional limitations or enhancements. Bardic scrolls require the user to sing or play an instrument depending on the creator's choice of his primary magic skill. Scrolls that require the user to play an instrument typically must be placed on a music stand, because the user's hands usually will be occupied with the instrument. In this case, the user must be within 2 yards of the scroll. Bardic scrolls are created with musical composition, not writing. Divine scrolls do not require the reader to share the dogma of the writer's patron deity. To represent this, apply plus 0.1 cost factor. Divine scrolls are identified with an appropriate specialty of theology. Druidic scrolls are usually written in Druidic, a secret language of the Druids. It is extraordinarily hard to find a Druidic scroll written in another language. Nature scrolls are identified with theology, Druidic. Psychic scrolls contain mantras that make the reader enter a short trance-like state and cast the written spell. Psychic scrolls are identified with thaumatology. I have not recorded a video on psychic magic yet, but I will. D&D also has the so-called martial scripts that allow the reader to use a martial maneuver from the Tome of Battle. These don't make much sense to me. Additionally, when scribing a scroll, the scribe may apply one of the following enhancements or limitations by applying a cumulative -2 to his skill per option. Some scrolls can be charged. Typically, a scroll requires the reader to pay the FP cost, but charged scrolls come with an internal energy reserve that allows the reader to cast the spell for free. If the scroll casts a maintainable spell, then the duration is fixed. The user cannot terminate the spell early or extend it, but it's still subject to the spell magic, etc. This applies a plus 0.05 cost factor per point of FP cost. Encrypted scrolls also exist. Wizards can learn new spells from scrolls and copy them to the spellbooks. To prevent the scroll from falling into the wrong hands, some scribes encrypt them. Deciphering an encrypted scroll requires winning a quick contest of the cryptography against the scribe. If you do not know the skill level, you can determine it randomly by rolling 1d plus 9. This applies a plus 0.2 cost factor. And there are also universal scrolls, a scroll that anybody can activate. The underlying spell type does not change. To learn from such a scroll, you must still be a caster who meets all the prerequisites. This applies a plus 0.2 cost factor. Scrolls are usually inked on heavy paper, parchment or papyrus, or bark for druidic scrolls. Such scrolls will ignite if hit by any burning damage. Paper, parchment or papyrus turns to mush if it spends more than a turn underwater, while bark is prone to being eaten by wildlife, especially nasty caterpillars. However, this is not the only way to scribe scrolls. The following options can be used by all scribes or be restricted to specific cultures. They are based on scroll forms from Dungeon Fantasy IV, Sages and several D&D and Pathfinder books. Bark Cloth takes 3 burning damage to ignite, and gives the writer a -2 penalty to skill. Clay Tablet cannot be set on fire, but is brittle. Use the same breakage rules as for potions. Embroidered Cloth takes 3 burning damage to ignite, and is not ruined by water. Engraved Metal has DR2 HP 3, so it is unlikely to break by accident. Engraving vanishes when the spell is cast, leaving a thin metal sheet, usually copper. Gemstone. A complex series of gestures and sounds is completed with a specifically prepared gemstone in hand, and the spell stored within it is released when the final words are spoken. Like the parchment on which a scroll is scribed, a gemstone is emptied by casting, but can be reused again. The scribe uses the lower of his writing, or other skill changed by the scroll type, and jeweler skill to scribe the scroll. Incendiary. A spell is stored in a special mix of powders and glyph-covered paper. To use an incendiary, a spellcaster speaks the last words of the spell while simultaneously igniting the prepared device, usually by means of a minor magical property of the incendiary form that requires no additional action to activate. The incendiary is consumed in a brilliant colored flash or haze of strangely coiling smoke, completing the spell. The scribe uses the lower of his writing or other skills changed by the scroll type and alchemy skill to scribe the scroll. Macrame. A spell is held in a small, complex weave of precisely tied knots. The user pulls apart the knotted square by choosing the right strands while speaking the spell's activation words. The scribe uses artist macrame instead of writing when scribing the scroll. Massive stone tablet, a massive stone slab, usually only found in ancient ruins, crumbles to sand once read. Riffle scroll. A riffle scroll is something similar to a standard scroll, but its methods of activation and shape are quite different. A riffle scroll can hold the power of a single spell. Each riffle scroll is a thin booklet, similar in shape to a chapbook, but somewhat smaller, containing 25 to 50 pages of eldritch symbols. When held between thumb and forefinger and riffled through in a quick manner, the motion of the pages turning activates the magic within, simultaneously completing casting of the spell and erasing the booklet. Riffle scrolls do not require words and can be activated with one hand. Riffle scrolls can only be made of paper. Scrolls on gear. One scroll can be painted, inscribed or embroidered on each cloak, shield, tool, weapon or piece of armor. Only the item's bearer can activate such a scroll, so it is only useful on gear he can easily see. Use common sense. The downside is this: if the spell roll is a critical failure, the item disintegrates. Stone tablet can be used as an improvised shield, with DB1. Crumbles to sand once read, has DR2 and HP 8. Tattooed leather. Only likely to be ruined if deliberately cut or hit by 10 points of burning damage. The scribe uses the lower of his writing or other skill changed by the scroll type and artist body art to scribe the scroll. Ink drips off like blood when read. Tattooed skin. The spell is tattooed directly to the skin, can be used by necromancers to tattoo zombies. You can have one spell tattooed on each arm, each leg, the head, you must shave it. And you'll need a mirror to read the tattoo. And the front torso. The scribe uses the lower of his writing or other skill changed by the scroll type, and artist body art skill to scribe the scroll. Ink drips off like blood when read. You can't read from a body part covered by armor or clothing. Critical failure means the spell afflicts you personally in whatever wicked way described by the GM. Vellum gives the writer a +1 bonus to skill when scribing a spell. Wax tablet. The writing can be easily ruined, but the tablet is very unlikely to break. And that's all, but what about psionics? In D&D, psionic characters have an item type identical to magical single-use scrolls, power stones. They can be represented using a gemstone form described above. The ability used via power stone uses the creator's skill level. If you do not know the skill level or want to determine it randomly, roll 1d + 9. When a Psi uses a power from a power stone, he can roll expert skill psionics. If he succeeds, he can learn this ability by spending character points on it later during the game. Power stones are identified with expert skill psionics. In addition, psionic sigils can be tattooed on the skin. To use a psionic tattoo, the user must touch it with bare skin, not read the script aloud. In all other aspects, psionic tattoos work like tattooed scrolls and power stones. It is vulnerable to supernatural erasure, so replace scroll -30% with tattoo -5%. Aboleths and mind flayers also inscribe psionic seals on objects. Such sigils are large, no less than 1 yard in diameter, so they are usually inscribed on static objects. They are activated just like psionic tattoos. Treat them as scrolls on gear in terms of price. What I like about GURPS scrolls is that they can be customized and have different mechanics. There are many different mediums and types, and you can really add a lot of flavor to different cultures by assigning them a scroll type. I also like scrolls as treasure because not only they can be useful well for casting, but the spellcasting characters may learn spells from them, especially wizards. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.